Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. Our next guest joins us from the Foundation for Government Accountability, and she is Senior Director for Federal Affairs. She is Robin Walker. Robin, welcome to Freedom and Prosperity Radio. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Joe. I'm doing great. It's great to be with you.
Robin has penned a post that you can read at fga.org regarding welfare reform in the wake of COVID-19. And I think this is a worry a lot of folks have, especially as we look at Son of CARES Act or CARES Act 3, Wrath of Khan. I'm not sure which one we're on yet, but this one is about state bailouts. And perhaps the end of federalism as we know it anyway. But have we allowed this virus to normalize the idea of it's somebody else's job to cover for us if we're in a crisis?
Well, I wouldn't call it that quite yet. We're seeing signs of that in a bunch of different legislative vehicles, Joe. I'm trying to be optimistic every day, so I want to try not to be too doomsday.
Okay.
But that's sure how it's looking. You put the pieces together, and there's little pieces in every piece of legislation that we're seeing that kind of push us in that direction. It's very concerning.
Well, especially in light of the rhetoric of the Sanders campaign, and so the idea, even Andrew Yang, the Liberty dividend, Pete Buttigieg talking about a guaranteed wage. That's where I worry that we're going. That enough folks had already begun to, would the phrase be, normalize the idea that there are other people out there in the world with enough money to fund whatever I need if I need it.
Sure. No, that's you're absolutely right. We're seeing that in a number of different proposals, and we're fighting though. Know that we're fighting against that.
Politically speaking, I know this may not be in your wheelhouse, but one of the things that it seems to be over my lifetime has been the campaign rhetoric is that the people who are pushing welfare for all are the ones who quote unquote care, and the folks who are talking about fiscal responsibility and bootstraps are the cold-hearted, mean-spirited, throw grandma from the train crowd. When really, as the president said in Detroit, how's that been working for you since 1965? If we had a real war that's been going as badly as the war on poverty, I'm sure there'd be protest marches all up and down the Washington reflecting pool.
Sure. No, that's absolutely right, and it hasn't worked. And let me tell you a little bit about what happened in the second COVID funding bill that's really, really concerning to us, and it's a big leap toward getting someone else to, i.e. the government, to give you something for free.
Mm-hmm.
The FFCRA, that's the Families First Coronavirus Act, it increased Medicaid funding for the traditional population by about 6% just during this emergency. But this actually really hurt states, and Virginia, is going to be crippled by this. This provision does two things. One, it says that states cannot remove anyone from the program, even ineligible enrollees.
Wow.
They can't change the eligibility standards from those in effect in January 2020 in order to get this money. So basically you're saying, states, if you have a good program integrity law, you require the regular removal of ineligible enrollees, you have to ignore your own state laws in order to fund these improper or illegal payments.
Wow.
These illegal Medicaid payments. Is that crazy?
Well, it sounds like, I remember when they were trying to push for Medicaid expansion here in the Commonwealth, and the argument was, we're just going to go get our own money back, which we knew it wasn't, but that was the argument that was being sent out in mailers to everybody across the Commonwealth, Robin. And now, we see it doubled up. Is this an end game push to sort of create that single payer mindset of Medicaid for all?
Absolutely. Spot on. So a couple of things we do know is we know that the emergency won't end anytime soon, right? If you look back to the 2008 stimulus, there were provisions of that law that were extended all the way through 2019.
Wow.
So the left has a way of extending well past the emergency.
Mm-hmm.
We also know that state budgets will not be able to handle new costs. And this is essentially, you're loading up states with Medicaid enrollees. There's been a couple accounts that are showing states that have added tens of thousands of people to their Medicaid rolls just here in the last 6 weeks because of this provision. So you're really overloading the program, right? And you've taken this tool away from states. They can't even manage enrollment. They can't even kick people that are ineligible off the program. So you've handcuffed states because you've said you need to fund these people. You need to pay for them even if they're not eligible for the program.
Gee. So, how do we get common sense put back into this, Robin? Because I worry that, I've heard from Republican legislators who have just sort of shrugged and said, you know what, the best we can hope for now is just getting a conservative manager on this progressive Leviathan.
Sure. I mean, honestly, what it's going to take is it's going to take you and me and everyone that can to contact their member of Congress. Congress needs to fix this provision immediately because states are they're beginning to collapse. They're already in dire straits. It's as simple as telling Congress, you need to end this provision and you need to give this tool back to states so they can manage their Medicaid rolls. As we're seeing, they're already coming out for other bailouts and other help. Right now, they want the federal government to fund them for lost revenues. It's just a matter of time before this particular Medicaid issue, compounds with all the other requests and makes everything worse.
This is Patrick Henry's worst nightmare of the federal government circumventing the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and federalism with bribery. We've watched it with the Medicaid program and the Medicaid expansion, but we've also watched them do it with education and with law enforcement. They send federal monies to your sheriff's department or your board of education, and then say, well, in order to get this money, you have to follow our federal dictate. And states are going to lose all their independence. And I'm afraid some folks in Virginia are like, well, what do I need independence for Virginia for? If the federal government's where all the money is.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's a huge fear. The strings that are attached, from the federal government with all of these things. We saw yesterday in the New HEROES Act introduced by Speaker Pelosi. We saw another thing that's really concerning, where they want to actually a whole bunch of increases for the food stamp program. That actually have nothing to do with the emergency itself.
Right.
But they want to exclude pandemic unemployment income for purposes of determining eligibility for food stamps.
Oh, gosh.
This is a huge problem, right? Because the way that you determine eligibility for a welfare program is you look at the whole picture of what someone is getting with regards to income. But if you start excluding big pieces of that, you could potentially end up with people making, 6 figures qualify for Medicaid, qualify for food stamps. And I will tell you, Joe, that this is part of a well-calculated attempt to push us all in that direction. We've kind of seen it play out in the Medicaid space over the last 2 months. Now, there was another provision in the CARES Act. So this was the bill passed after the Family First Coronavirus Act, which we talked about a minute ago. So this is just mind-boggling. This is going to blow you away. It expanded Medicaid eligibility even further because it said individuals filing for unemployment to receive that additional $600 a week. Mm-hmm. And remember, this is $600 on top of normal unemployment compensation.
Right.
This $600 isn't treated as income for purposes of determining Medicaid eligibility. So similar to that, yeah.
Great.
So similar to the food stamp provision that I just shared with you that was in this Democrat bill introduced yesterday, we've got all of these attempts to give people more money, but exclude it from their actual income when you're determining their eligibility for all these welfare programs. So it's a real problem, and it's a calculated attempt. It's step by step, and if we're not careful, and if conservatives are not watching this and keeping track of it, we're really going to be in a hurt moment.
Robin Walker is on with us, Senior Director of Federal Affairs for the Foundation for Government Accountability, which, only seems to be accountable to their re-election campaigns right now, Robin. As we've already seen folks go out and say, if you like that $600 check, don't vote for my opponent because they will take it away from you. The usual demagoguery has come out of this. But I'm not a historian per se, but I've studied the collapse of the classic democracies, and they all seem to go this very similar way. The population starts voting for their income instead of voting for right and wrong. They just vote for what's going to make me the most money, and eventually these states collapsed economically. We've got what could be $28 trillion in debt by the time this is all said and done, and so I can't imagine the dollar being worth very much at all. But even if we try to pay back the debt, I think it's something like $37,000 per citizen of debt if we were all asked to pay it back.
Wow, that actually sounds low. At this point, I'm wondering if it's gone up since these
maybe
recent, funding packages have gone by. But you're absolutely right. We've seen polling that shows that once someone gets on welfare in any shape or form, they are much more likely to vote Democrat. So what you have is you've got the well-oiled machine that tries to get you on a program because they know that once they got you on a program, they've got your vote forever. Mm-hmm. And that is extremely disturbing.
Well, and doubly disturbing from a humanitarian standpoint, what that does is it dilutes the help for somebody who truly needs it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. What our research has shown in the states, especially with Medicaid, is that when you expand a program, so I'll take Medicaid, for example. Mm-hmm. When you expand Medicaid, and the Affordable Care Act saw the largest expansion of welfare to able-bodied adults without dependents or children in our history. So imagine that. The Affordable Care Act was the largest expansion of welfare to able-bodied adults without dependents or children. So we're talking, they're not seniors, they're not disabled, they don't have kids, they're not married. This is your 18 to 49-year-old males who got thrown onto the Medicaid program. So it's extremely dangerous.
Well, and like I said, then it leaves very little money for the 80-year-old that actually needs some help, perhaps, getting a one of those chairs that helps them stand up or something along those lines, because that money's disappeared, and they wind up having to face this enormous bureaucracy, and they wind up being mad at the system rather than the people who have gamed it.
Precisely. We've done some research actually that shows the wait lists, some of the Medicaid wait lists, and the people on those wait lists are people with disabilities, really vulnerable populations that can't get access to care because the able-bodied adults have slipped in. And so you're absolutely right. We've got to protect these programs for the truly needy, not just who, one party might say are needy. There's this delightful young lady named Skylar that we've worked with over the years, and I think she's in Arkansas. And there's a video on our website, and I want to check it out. But it tells the story about how she had a really hard time accessing Medicaid, and she had a lifelong disability. But because of the Affordable Care Act Medicaid expansion, it just made it extremely difficult for truly vulnerable populations to get access.
And it happens all over the place. UVA took part in believe it or not, it wasn't the economics department at UVA, it was the legal department at UVA, along with the legal departments of UMass, Amherst, Stanford, and other notable halls of academia, did a think tank on what kind of tax policy would have to come to help us recover from COVID-19. And they had everything short of a Monty Python sketch on the things that you could tax, including just using software on the internet would be taxable, accessing the internet would be taxable, using Facebook, the number of bytes you use in your data plan would be taxable. I mean, it was like a fever dream.
Wow. I mean, I think that's a real reality, right? We're dealing with lost revenues at the state level. I'm not an economist, so I don't want to speak too authoritatively, but I've read some of the literature. And for every dollar that the federal government sends to the states in the form of, stimulus money or emergency aid, you create this flypaper effect where the state will now have to, for every dollar it receives, then they're going to have to generate another dollar in income to keep up with that pace of spending, right? Because the more money you get from the Fed, the more money you're gonna spend as as the state, and it's just a snowball effect. Like I don't think it stops, and that's really scary.
On our topic, though, Robin, I've talked to several small business owners in our flagship city that are more concerned with getting their employees back than their customers. My customers will come back. I can't get my, key employees back because they want to stay home.
Absolutely, and I mean, there's a couple reasons for that, right? We've now disincentivized work because we're paying people more to not work right now, and as one of my friends on the other side of the aisle rightly pointed out to me, we're paying, well, not rightly, I completely disagree, but that we're paying people to stay safe. And I thought that was just the craziest thing I've ever heard. No, we're paying people not to work. We're paying people to watch Netflix all day. I have a real problem with that. We've got, and this is what this is what we fight for with our policies. We are all about the American spirit of hard work and the dignity of work and the pride that comes through being self-sufficient and not relying on government dependence. And we've got to be really careful here going forward in how we disincentivize American workers from going back to work. They can't be afraid, right? There's no reason to be afraid. You just be safe. You be cautious. You can't stop. But to your point, the $600 payment, you could actually have, so that $600 could get you Medicaid. 2 months ago, someone who was working lost their job due to COVID. Now all of a sudden, they've got an extra $600 on top of their unemployment insurance. They go back to work tomorrow, Joe. They're still on Medicaid. So now they've got their $600 a week payment on top of their unemployment insurance, right? And the $600 a week goes through July 31st, I think. They're trying to extend it, of course. But now you've potentially got somebody with six figures on Medicaid for the next year. Wow. Now here's where we see the pieces come together. That person's on for the next year. So what's the incentive of their employer, who's probably hurting financially due to the COVID pandemic? Why is their employer now going to offer them insurance? Why are they going to offer them employer-based health insurance if they're already getting quote-unquote free Medicaid from the government?
And then
that's where this gets very concerning, because you've got so many people loaded on the Medicaid. Employers don't feel like they need to offer insurance, and so the system collapses underneath itself, and you have a Medicaid for all type scenario.
Robin Walker is Senior Director of Federal Affairs for the Foundation for Government Accountability. Thank you so much for visiting us this week.
Oh, Joe, it's my pleasure.
You can read her column at thefga.org. And for all of us here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, my name is Joe Thomas. Until next weekend, so long, and thanks for all the fish.